Hi everyone, welcome to Constant Writers Season 2, Episode 2. I'm very excited to have you here. My name is Dave Musson, at Dave Musson on Instagram, and this is the show where I talk to indie horror authors about them, about their work, and then between us, we geek out about Stephen King. We chat about how Stephen King has influenced them as writers, and then we take a deep dive into a book of my guest's choice before wrapping up with the 19-question quickfire Stephen King challenge. If you haven't checked out the previous episodes, do make sure once you finish with this one to go back and listen. We've got some great conversations from Season 1, and Season 2 is also shaping up to be an absolute ripper. Also, don't forget you can sign up to my weekly newsletter where you get more indie horror author recommendations from me and some short fiction from me as well. The link to that is in the description for this episode. Also, you'll find a link to my book, The Ultimate Stephen King Quiz Book. If you ever fancy running your own Stephen King trivia night, you can go and get that and, well, quiz away until your heart is completely content. Anyway, I'm rambling now. Let's get on to the intro for this episode, which I'm really excited to share with you. So my guest for this one is an absolute hunk of a man, a punk rocker, a swaggering, confident author who dialed in from Australia. It's the one and only Garth Jones. So we talked about a whole range of things, particularly his own imprint, Pass the Amyl, which is where you can get his collection Cheaper Skips, and his Home Brewed Vampire Bullets series, which, yeah, are really exciting projects to go and explore. We talk about being fiercely independent, having a punk rock sense of, well, independence. We talk about the Super Mario's movie, we talk about stock image covers, and then we take a deep dive on Garth's book of choice, The Dark Half. So we cover some stuff from this book, we cover pseudonyms, and we just have generally a really good time, and we managed to dodge any sparrows that were flying again. So this is a great conversation. Really enjoyed getting to know Garth and chatting more about him and his path to being a writer, and of course geeking out about King. So I will see you on the other side, but for now, settle down and enjoy my conversation with Garth Jones. Welcome to Constant Writers. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good, man. We're right in the middle of school holidays. I'm sure you know what that's like. And I've just been to see Super Mario, so I'm in a very Stephen King mood now.
Ah, nice. And how was Super Mario?
I'm amazed it's making that much money. But God, it could have been much worse. I'm going to see Argonauts tomorrow, so we've got like the full school holiday complement of junk to get through.
Oh, nice. Well, I'm sure you're looking forward to that. Obviously, we will get on to Stephen King later in this chat, but I wanted to start by talking about you, and I think there's a load to chat about, as there always is with people who I get on this show. But for you, I mean, I don't think I've ever spoken to such a, I guess the only way to put it is such a punk rock author before. I mean, I guess before we get into your work and your imprint and your ethos and all of that kind of thing, like, I guess to start, the question I always ask people to start these, like, what's your origin story with all things literature? When did you fall in love with writing? When did you fall in love with reading? All of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I come from Broken Hill in far western New South Wales, which is where Mad Max 2 was shot. So this is like, growing up pre-internet in one of the most remote places in Australia. The local library was pretty much where you went if you weren't playing, a football player. So, it was, my parents were readers. They were into theatre, musical theatre, all the stuff that they, is not the cliche of like growing up in a, rough and tumble regional town. We always, were at the library. And it was, I think we'll probably get to it, but I think I first probably got on the King with Eyes of the Dragon or something like that. And that was pretty much, go time for me. English course in Australia in primary school and high school, not too bad. Followed through with stuff like 3 English, which is like where you learn the Gothic and all that sort of gear, in preparation to go into university. So, it was pretty much writ, to pardon the pun, to get into communications. I went into graphic design first, and then circled back.
I've read the about section of your website, and it's prompted a couple of questions that I'm sure it prompts everyone to ask you when you're doing these interviews, but I'm going to throw them out there anyway. So the about section says that your first job was designing ads for phone sex lines, and that you did time as a resident atheist provocateur at a church newspaper, and you drew comics for the one and only David Lee Roth when you were just out of uni. I mean, Garth, just tell me about like all of those things.
I'd never really had a focused career plan. It'd be easy to surmise from that. Yeah, I mean, I studied in Sydney. I went as far away from Broken Hill as I could when I left in the first place. So Sydney was like a 24-hour train ride. And I gave up on uni halfway through because I decided I did want to start, working professionally. And it's a little bit of a tweak on the bio. I actually worked for a TV station for a few months before I got the phone sex line job. And yeah, it reads better. And I lasted a month because I was just sitting with pornography all day. And it's actually turns out, a lot of my friends from school went on to work on the mine, and they read the magazines I designed the ads for. And they thought it was the most spectacular job you could possibly get, but it's really grueling and really depressing to actually be exposed to that much pornography all day, every day. Yeah. And people calling up, because part of the job was to answer the phone to take credit card numbers. This is sort of like the burgeoning as the internet was eating porn completely. And you would have to answer the phones to people expecting to go straight through to the ladies on the... So for me, it was a month of like harrowing insights into like I guess the male psyche.
Right.
And moving on from that, I continued studying, and then I worked on a book called Van Halen, Strange and Twisted Tales with an author called Lance Watts in the States, it actually caught David Roth's eye eventually, and we ended up working on his webcomic when it was a Flash-based experience. So you can guess the first dates.
What's he like to work with? Because I remember reading his autobiography. My dad recommended me reading it, and he just said to me, when you read it, don't imagine him reading it to you. Imagine him shouting it to you, because that's kind of what he's like. Like, what is he like to work with?
Well, I was all secondhand through Lance the writer, so I didn't actually have any direct contact. I have an answering machine message somewhere and a check that he signed for the project. But the answering machine message was essentially that, he had, 2 Playboy. This is like 2003, I guess. So it was like getting a bit sad. Yeah. But nonetheless, it was still Dave. He was getting around in the bronze sort of, one piece with like the 2 Playboy models dressed as cats. And it was pre the reunion where the Van Halen brothers sort of straightened him out again, I think, to an extent.
Okay, nice. Oh, it certainly makes you stand out in your about section. I've not read that anywhere else. I mean, so you bounce around from these different jobs that are all kind of giving you some very rich life experiences, to say the least. So when did you start taking your writing more seriously?
I'm going to credit actually working for the Uniting Church in Australia for that. This was sort of 7 or 8 years ago now, and I was coming off the back of a few graphic design jobs that I'd been sort of pretty miserable in. And I expressed to the editor of it was a church newspaper we were working on, and my editor, this is like a little team of atheists within the Uniting Church itself, said to the editor, look, I can write, and can I just sort of start to like work my way in with like reviews and things like that. So in quick succession, I ended up doing stuff like the first season of Preacher, the Garth Ennis comic adaptation. Got that over the line into the church newspaper's review section, and just kept nudging and seeing, because, shit stirring, nudging away, seeing what I could expose the audience to. And they're all, the Uniting Church is a pretty progressive church, but my hate mail folder is still pretty dense. I got a lot of theological musings from people, especially when I was doing stuff around the same-sex marriage the plebiscite in Australia. and writing about the Dark Mofo Festival and things like that, which did have church involvement. But yeah, there's a conservative streak that was very fun to sort of needle as much as possible. Yeah. Yep.
And what about sort of fiction side? Did you
start
experimenting and stuff there? Or?
The editor Deb there was very encouraging, getting me back on board there, and then I actually did start submitting shorts and things. And one of the first things I did was like what ended up being the first 40 pages of the Home Brewed Vampire Bullets project in a very early form, but that sort of gave me the sense of actually it was achievable now, and the edgelordy voice that I'd developed previously seemed to have been gone. You know, I was writing notes and I was playing with little bits and pieces, but just felt like, I was, trying to ape way too many other people.
Yeah.
And I think the voice just clicked suddenly around 2015, 2016 and started to feel a lot more like something that was uniquely me, and that, I'd just sit down and pump out 2,000 words a day or whatever, and it felt good.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Home Brewed Vampire Bullets there, and I absolutely wanted to talk about that. I know by the time this episode comes out, Volume 3 will be out there in the world, and the series is definitely on my TBR. And the synopsis has me hooked already. I'd appreciate like giving me, and I guess those watching and listening, just like what's the pitch for this one, for the series, and I guess for the new volume in particular.
The pitch is essentially this is a blackout drunk road adventure featuring a burnt out pub rocker called Ed Von Satan, who was zombified by a bunyip, and I've played fast and loose with a lot of mythos. It's inspired by Ozploitation. It gets pretty political, and it's all driving towards a giant music festival that's being run by a self-help cult. Who are actually being controlled by essentially a conservative politician who is also an otherworldly entity that wants to basically strip mine the planet and use it as a resource. So,
like most
politics ramp up. Yeah.
Like most conservative politicians then.
Yeah, and I mean, my Tory baiting in the third one gets pretty, I'm very proud of the 30 or 40 names I came up with for the Tories towards the end, and I'm disappointed that I killed them all. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. In the UK, there was an imprint called Attack Books in the late 90s, which was like the journalist Stephen Wells, Zodiac Mind Warp, all those guys. And retrospectively, I've sort of realised that that's sort of the tone that I'm working in, like the sort of mongrel punk. It's not literate, it's not high literature. It's like pulpy, but yeah, there's ideas in there that like slide past, and sort of, it's been very gratifying to see that people are actually reading it and picking that up as well. Yeah, at first glance, it's going to be very sweary and very sort of in your face, especially with the Australian vernacular. I'm surprised it travels as well as it does.
Well, I was going to ask, like, how have volumes 1 and 2 gone down so far? Then has it been a generally positive reaction?
Yeah, I'll do some name dropping. Kirsty Allison, who's like a UK author and personality. She's been really kind to it. She wrote the book Psychomachia that came out from Wrecking Ball Press a couple of years ago. She's sort of, I guess she's your Courtney Love. I hope she doesn't listen to this and then hate me saying that. But yeah, really encouraging stuff from authors like Duvet Knox, who's like a black pulp fiction, occult sort of author from Louisiana. I mean, the whole idea of this project has sort of been to sort of plant the flag, I guess, and just get the word out, and then sort of like, build the project after it's released. But yeah, really happy with the reviews, really happy with people engaging with it and actually, picking up on getting past the sort of blood and guts of the first one and then engaging with the ideas a lot more. And it's just super fun. Yeah.
And then there's also Cheaper Skips, which is a collection of shorts that were written, I think you put it written during, but not necessarily about the pandemic. And that's one I have read and really enjoyed. Going
What was your favourite story?
I think I can't remember the titles off the top of my head. The one with the guy who keeps coming through the gas station. and
Right. Yep.
the businessman. Yeah, I
Definitely not
thought
based on anyone.
that. Definitely not. I think it's what I really like about it is I get a real sense of, I will obviously get a real sense of your style, but there's a real kind of boldness and confidence in your own writing there, and a real swagger about it. I mean, you mentioned it was kind of like a pandemic project of sorts. So was this collection of shorts, is this the pandemic giving you the chance to do something you've always wanted to do, or was it just a result of that weird time that
I think it was
sprung it out?
I mean, coming into this, like the genesis of it would have been, I started primary caring for our daughter, who's now 4.5, in 2019, and mid 2019, I guess. So that was the sort of runway into the pandemic, and having all that energy, creative energy to burn, and all that anxiety too, because like I was, you'd turn around, you'd read about how someone was convinced there was going to be a methane burp that was going to wipe out all of existence, instantaneously. And it was, obviously, but then we're all locked down. And sort of kidding myself that it wasn't a pandemic thing, but it was definitely a reaction to querying, pitching, and just getting lots of blank stares, and then realizing that actually I know what I'm doing and I know exactly how I want to present it. And that was the point I decided to test out the model by by creating the imprint and then publishing something and seeing where I could promote it, how to promote it, and how to make it unique with things like the QR codes for like, probably by the time you read it, all the special video stuff was down because I was changing my website over. But there's a lot of things, additional materials like DVD stuff and conversational things, and into the new books, which are all have music by a friend of mine from Seattle.
Okay.
And that's, something that's sort of, again, tying everything together and having this amazing soundtrack by John Short, who goes as half Majesty. Really John Carpenter inspired sort of vibe. But it's curating all that sort of gear is what really saved me, I guess, in the sense of like being stuck at home all the time. Even though here in Queensland was less painful than a lot of other places, but nonetheless. Yeah.
Well, you mentioned your imprint there. I wanted to ask about that before we move on to talking about the big dog Stephen King. I mean, your imprint, it just from on a pure basic point of view, it just looks extremely cool and it's so creative. I mean, you've mentioned those extras there, and like QR codes to sort of take you to all these additional bits and pieces to sort of flesh out these stories, and just the bold graphic design. I mean, you can tell that you have a background in design as well because it just looks so good, and there's a real strong ethos behind it. Like specifically, you're really upfront about staying the hell away from Amazon, which is interesting because so many self-publishers are almost dependent on Amazon because it is such a big market. But like, I'm curious just to hear a little bit more about this, because it's clearly something you've put a lot of thought and a lot of effort into, and when people discover it, I think they'll go mad for it. But like, I'm just curious to hear about a bit more about it, really.
I mean, pretty bolshy about I don't. I've been forced to do the occasional Amazon purchase lately for research, and like I just it's just that sense of like feeding that beast. And I know it's self-defeating, but at the same time, I'm not I like the challenge of actually like getting this out under my own steam and using the wiles. I do ask people to review on Goodreads. I realize that's still owned by Amazon anyway. But fuck, there's a point where you're sort of like rocking a hard place. I guess especially the luxury at the moment of like, as the sort of primary carer, like I've got this window of time where I'm just focusing on this project, but I'm not actually going to Super Mario or doing the usual gear. So there is a sense of urgency. I mean, I started the book with a sense of urgency. Started the Home Brewed project with a sense of urgency because I literally had 9 months to write something I've promised myself for 15 years I was going to do. And there's nothing that sort of gets you moving like that deadline.
Yep.
But I just really, at the end of the day, like I can do all that stuff and I want to do all that stuff myself. And it's what's satisfying about it is like having total creative control and not being told what to do.
Well, it's, yeah, 'cause I was going to ask, like, have you always had this independent kind of punk rock streak, or how much of this has come about after trying to get published in the traditional, in inverted commas, way? Like, has that had any effect on where you've taken the imprint?
I think, you know, looping back to like coming from Broken Hill, there's like, there's that sort of, I'm not going to self-attribute this too much, but like there's just that sense of being an outsider and not being, you know, you just need to do shit your own way. And yeah, I was pretty certain that it was going to be a, you know, pushing shit uphill to try and get a traditional publisher to look at this stuff. But by the same token, you know, really encouraged, like there's an Australian long form journalist named Richard Cook, who's been really, really supportive. He's like, you know, he's in the New Yorker, he's in the Atlantic, he's all over the place. And like, we've had a few conversations and done a few little sort of podcasty things. And it's, you know, that motivates me. The fact that there are like, you know, the understanding of the culture and like sort of, we don't do a lot of, you know, there's not much satire. No one does satire. No one does stuff in genre in Australia because it's such a small pool. It's all literary fiction and it's all pretty, you know, not narrow, I guess, but it's hard to sort of get something like this over the line. But with the advertising background and everything, I feel comfortable with like pushing it and sort of nurturing it into like growing an audience and not just sort of doing that thing that I noticed with a lot of creatives in Australia, especially, which is cringing about self-promoting. They'll put their thing out and then they'll just expect people to come to it.
Yeah.
Which just seems to be, you know, a terrible idea, or apologizing for promoting something that you've worked on for years.
Well, I think that's something that a lot of independent authors and independent artists in general struggle with. I know I've talked about it with Kelly Brocklehurst on the last season of this podcast, and we both, I think both of us being perhaps naturally more introverted, it's exactly that. You spend days, weeks, months, years on putting your work together, and then it's finally there, and then you just, I don't know, there's a natural aversion to actually telling people about it, and it's really refreshing coming across your imprint and seeing how bold it is, and seeing that you have got that confidence in what you're doing. It's just great to see.
I guess I'll preface that with like, I did an anthology about a decade where I tried to sort of wrangle a bunch of people, and it worked for a while, but it was like life sort of destroyed it eventually. But like bringing 20 or 30 people together to do like a comics, photography, prose anthology that was a pretty chunky 150 pages every quarter was, I guess that was sort of like the breeding ground of developing some of that confidence, because I was pushing their work.
Yeah.
But in terms of, pushing mine, I guess the real transition was when my friend Justin invited me to do his podcast, Big Squid. And it's just like, you know, he's a comedian. He's been in the media for the last, 20 or 30 years. And it's just, you've just got to back yourself and actually, tell people. And, if people get sick of you, they can mute you, sure. But just keep it entertaining at least. Yes,
Yeah. And in terms of backing yourself, like, are you interested at all in working with a more traditional publisher now, or do you see yourself just continuing to do your own thing?
There are a couple of projects that a collaboration that I'm starting at the moment that I could see headed in that direction. But in terms of my own stuff, I quickly got the sense that my production ideas and all the rest are pretty hard to get over the line for projects like this. Even with a smaller indie, people still want that sort of control over the output. And I mean, halfway through this, I've decided to change all the covers, and I can. Whereas no one else is going to let me do that. So Home Brewed will stay on the Amyl. But there are other things that I think will, go in more traditional directions now that I've got a better idea of how that system works and, who to talk to, I suppose.
Yeah. And what about the prospect of not only publishing your own work on your imprint, but like signing other authors? Is that something that interests you?
Nope. Not at all.
Okay.
Too hard.
Yeah. I think it does sound like a pretty hard work, actually.
I mean, I guess if there was someone really unique, I would consider, but I'd have, my tendency to get in the weeds and try and put the vision on top probably wouldn't be appreciated anyway. So I'll stick to my lane on that one.
Well, let's we are here to talk Stephen King, so let's talk about him. Again, same question I ask everyone when we get to this part of the interview. What does Stephen King mean to you as a fan, and what sort of place does he hold in your heart?
He was the gateway drug. He was I always read, as a saying, as I guess, from 4 or 5 years old. And I'd always be trawling through secondhand bookshops with my dad on Christmas vacations and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, as I said, I think it was Eyes of the Dragon, and then The Misfortune of Tommyknockers within a few weeks from the library, because he was right in the thick of that sort of post, or coming out of the entire 80s dependency thing. And yeah, at that point, it was the visceral thrill of the experience of reading and looking up and going, I've just read 300 pages. And this guy's just got the pace and the skill to bring you in. And yeah, after that, it was obviously sort of down the library looking at, I don't think I've ever read a Dean Koontz book, but sort of Clive Barker, those, getting into those sorts of zones, a bit of Ramsey Campbell, a bit of James Herbert, and obviously branching out from horror and sort of leaving that after school. But definitely coming back to the well a lot.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, I was shocked to discover that I'd read probably 60 or 70% of the bibliography.
Yeah, that's a lot of books when we're talking Stephen King. I mean, what sort of impact has King had on your own writing, if any?
Well, I was going through a few things last night, and I'm going to pin. I was looking at the regulators, because we're going to talk about the pseudonyms and the sort of the death of Richard Bachman, and it's that the King's rhythm, injection of lyrics, the media breaks, the parenthetical asides. I mean, all that stuff definitely had an influence on you don't have to do things traditionally. In the Home Brewed books, I every band has a different typeface for their name. Sort of dive in with the illustration and bits of typographic stuff. But that was, I guess, that planted the seed pretty early that you didn't have to sort of stick to the tradition and the sort of formal style of writing that you were sort of introduced to. So yeah, it's everywhere. I couldn't pick. It's synthesized through everything I do, I think.
Yeah, and you mentioned you reckon you've read let's say so 3/4 of his work. Have you kept up to date with his more recent work, or is there a particular sweet spot or time period of King's stuff that particularly floats your boat?
I came back with Revival, and I think there are patches in the late 90s after, I reckon, Buick 8 maybe, where I sort of fell away when it was into the Hearts and Atlantis and that sort of zone. But yeah, I think there are patches sort of late 90s, late noughties, but pretty much everything else I've sort of kept up with. I've read Fairy Tale. Done my Billy Summers.
Yeah.
I do wonder about the editor sometimes, but yeah.
If he even has an editor.
Yes.
Well, let's jump into your book of choice then, which is The Dark Half, and very excited to talk about that because that is a book that is always knocking around my own personal top 10. I think it's severely underrated. But I guess before we get onto The Dark Half, when you were considering which book you wanted to go in on, were there any others that came up that you perhaps want to give a shout out to, an honourable mention to when you were coming? I did think
Revival. I would like to revisit Revival. It's been about a decade since it came out. Something like Desperation, even, that I think maybe is underrated in some senses. Or the combination of Desperation and Regulators, which I went back and, as I said, looked at, and it was interesting to see what he was playing with in the mid 90s, I guess, when that was out. But yeah, Dark Half is sort of like a all timer for me. So
Yeah. Well, let's get on to it then. The Dark Half, 1989 novel about his author, Thad or Tad. I don't know. Thad. They say Thad in the movie.
It's Thad in the movie, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So it's Thad Beaumont whose secret pen name is discovered. So he kills the guy off, and then that bad mofo George Stark comes back to life and starts killing people. Obviously, as I said, this one's consistently towards the top of my ranking. So I'm fully supportive of this choice. But why did you pick it? You just said it's an all-timer for you. So what is it about this book?
I think it's one of his funniest books.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's some stuff in there that I like. You know, I was like 15, I think, when I read it. It's been a while, and coming back to it, like some of the stuff, even in the prologue, the surgeon is hilarious. It's got some of the lines for the surgeon are out there. Like, I won't repeat some of the language, but yeah, it's nasty. Like the Richard Bachman through line is definitely there. It's got, some of that sort of, it's blacker, the ideas around the pen name and the duality of what he'd experienced with the Richard Bachman gear. With the hook I didn't know was there when I first read it, but like the backstory is pretty fascinating too. And it's just one of those, rereading it was a complete flashback. Like, I remembered everything. Poor old Homer, the whole thing. Like, it was, it's just been etched in the back of my brain for like 30 years, basically.
And it's quite a visceral one. This, I mean, there's lots of kills. Like, do you have a favorite George Stark kill?
It's Frederick Clawson, of course, because it was just like, at the time I was like, what? I didn't. Gangland, what? Yeah, and then I think I would have seen the film pretty close to it as well. So you had the double whammy of like getting the silhouette as well to go with it. But yeah, Frederick Clawson, sure, and the nastiest one, and he's the guy who starts the whole thing rolling. So if I was it Steve Brown? It was the actual guy who If I was Steve, I'd be very grateful that the other Steve was less.
Yeah, I mean in real life, Stephen King arranged for the guy to sort of write about it in a national magazine, didn't he? It's
there was a Washington Post article. It was really good. Really, he was a good writer too. Very reasonable, all things considered.
So in terms of the sort of the characters at the center of the Dark Half, we've obviously got the two halves of Thad. We've got Thad and we've got George Stark, and they're necessarily very different as how they come across on page. Like, if you were putting yourself in, if you were forced to pick, are you more team Thad or are you more team George?
I'm team George. He got ripped off, really, didn't he? Poor bastard. It was just an eyeball and a few teeth.
Yeah.
Thad ruined his life, really. And I think to that, we'll get there, I'm sure. But I think I'm team George in the film more so than the book, because I think the twin aspect works better with Timothy Hutton playing both characters. Versus like Alexis Machine, George Stark essentially being Alexis Machine with the blonde slab of malformed clay that goes around and ruins all these people.
And this is a book where we it's the first time we meet Alan Pangborn as well, I think, in the King universe. Like, what do you make of him as a character? And is he someone you enjoy sort of keeping up with later on in later books?
He's an interesting cop character, isn't he? Like, he's sort of the skeptic, but also decent bloke. And Norris Ridgwick's pretty funny too. Like a lot of the sort of I guess he calls it the Barney Fife-isms, doesn't he? Like they're all based on like Andy Rooney sort of televisual tropes. And I think because Pangborn's in Needful Things, where does he show up after that? Because that might have been where I sort of lost the thread a bit.
That's basically where he sails off, because he does his fancy magic tricks to get rid of Leland Gaunt, and then I think we hear about him in passing in Bag of Bones, but Norris and Andy Clutterbuck sort of take the reins after that.
That's right.
So he has his moment in Needful Things, really. But yeah, it's kind of you've got him following on from Bannerman. So I guess he does better than Bannerman because he doesn't get his guts ripped out by a rabid dog. So it's a positive start.
Yeah, I love the Castle Rock books are sort of like where it all sort of came together, I guess. For me. And also I like the idea of the Dark Half as like part of the trilogy about writing that started with Misery through Tommy Knockers and then sort of comes to a sort of crux in Dark Half as well. Like, although Tommy Knockers is obviously 2/3 psychosis. Yeah. Like as soon as we get to like, I remember as when I read it the first time, getting to it and just sort of like, oh, there's a big chunk of town history that I clearly don't need to know. And flicking straight past that. Yeah.
And it's interesting throwing Misery into that grouping as well, because Misery was famously going to be a Bachman book originally, and it was a lot nastier. I think it was going to end with Annie Wilkes producing this book and making a cover out of Paul Sheldon's skin for it. Which obviously so I think it's interesting to make the connection between those two, like that it is all sort of that there is some connective tissue running through it there, and that there's different ideas of writing. There's like the fandom, there's the, I guess with the Dark Half, as much as anything, it's about satisfying your own creative needs and like doing what you want to do. And then Tommy Knockers in the middle is what? Productivity? I don't know. I don't know how to sum up that one in terms of its comments on writing. Just buy a shitload of back. I just go for it.
It just doesn't work if you're like too narcotized, or at least edit sober. I think it was.
Yeah, the irony of seeing kids
right wasted, edit sober.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. Coming back onto the Dark Half. I mean, it's obviously a bit of an out there plot. I think as long as you accept the premise, it's a lot of fun to go with. But there are still some unusual parts in it, even for a story with the plot that it is. And I think the Sparrows for me have always stood out as an unusual device and something that comes back throughout the book. Like, as we see them in the surgery scene, we obviously they help in the climax, and they're sort of there throughout. Like, do they work for you as a plot device, these little birds?
They don't work so well on screen. But I was reading about this recently because we were staying in a I'm pretty sure it was a haunted farmhouse when we came back to Australia after a bit of a stint in New Zealand. It had some very, very interesting vibes. And magpies in Indigenous culture here are considered to be either like similar. They're psychopomps. Mm-hmm. They are either there to pick up someone to take to the afterlife, or they're sort of they're an omen of something about to happen. So maybe you could have just maybe we can go back and do magpies, because magpies are bigger, like they're seagull size, and you might get a better outcome. Yeah, but I think it works. I mean, it's creepy as hell. The sparrows flying, or threatening to fly. But I think with that little bit of extra knowledge, it did help sort of get the concept over the line in hindsight.
Yeah. So I was curious, like, if you had, or maybe you do have, and I'm not asking you to reveal any secrets, but let's say you had a Dark Half out there who was doing stuff in this space as well. What might their name be, and what genre do you think they would write?
I'm going to stick with Steve's process for creating the name. He had Bachman Turner Overdrive on, and Richard Stark on his desk. So I'm going with Rennie Letricet. Rennie Ellis is an Australian photographer. It's currently propping up my laptop. Okay. And Letricet was a book of typography that was sitting next to me last night when I was going through these. And he's going to be Rennie is a disgustingly high-selling daddy literature author who's got a hugely well-regarded series of daddy lit novels, or in every chain store in the country. So he's the worst half. Yeah.
Definitely the Dark Half. But
he's probably paleo. He's probably like an anti-vaxxer too. So
But hey, like with that, if that keeps the money coming in and lets your light half do what you want to do, then that's all good. And I mean, obviously we've touched on this. This whole idea behind the Dark Half is obviously inspired by King's own pseudonym, Richard Bachman, sort of being rumbled and all of that stuff. And I remember reading for this when I was writing my King quiz book. I remember reading that he actually first wanted this book to have been one that was co-authored by him and Bachman. And I keep coming back to the idea of this and thinking, like, it's that if they'd made it that far with The Secret having not come out, trying to work out how they would have done it. And like King clearly rich enough and connected enough to make it happen. Do you think it would have worked if we'd have got to 89 with Bachman still being a mystery?
I guess my question is like around his process as Bachman. You know, was it primarily the depressive anxiety, substance abuse, all the rest? And this is his first sober novel, Dark Half.
Yeah.
So would that have been playing with fire to have, treaded into that sort of territory that early in his sobriety? That would be my question. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wonder whether obviously he got rumbled, but like, I wonder whether if he'd have still had Bachman as a secret at that point, but he'd made his sobriety, exactly as you were saying, I wonder whether he would have just abandoned that idea, like you say, because it would have been too risky. Because I can imagine a still using King having a lot of fun doing this and hiring, like, getting an actor in to come and do conventions with him and stuff, and you could see them taking it quite far and quite silly, really. But yeah, I think you make a really good point there about not exactly knowing what was the process behind his own Dark Half and what might that do to his brain, because he obviously left it. I mean, The Regulators is the next time he picks up anything from Bachman, and that was 96. That's a good decade plus after being rumbled, and clearly he was in a much healthier place then, so he probably felt more in control to come back to it then. But yeah, I don't know. I do still like it as an idea, but yeah, not.
Maybe you can do it now. He seems pretty pretty nailed down and stable now. So
yeah, bring him back from the dead.
One more role.
You mentioned the movie, the 1993 George A. Romero movie. I think it was filmed like 2 years earlier, but I think Dimension Films just basically went bankrupt, so they couldn't do anything for a couple of years.
That was right. Yeah.
Are you a fan of the movie?
Yes. Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's certainly underrated. And yeah, I think I saw. Yeah, it would have been because Pet Sematary was 89, 90, wasn't it? But then he had a good little pocket of the dark stuff coming out, and I mean, I don't love Timothy Hutton, but I do love the idea of the twin being replicated more clearly than the books. I think that adds a bit more to the narrative than having the two dissimilar sort of physical appearances. I think Romero's like practical stuff, like, watching the documentaries leading up to this and looking at like what the process was. It sounds like Romero was probably too laid back for the relatively large budget they had for the era. Michael Rooker, it's fun to think about him actually playing Thad and George, as apparently was one of the options, but like no one could see him doing it after Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, playing the family man. And yeah, the cinematography, like some of the scene with the photographer in the hallway, there's just some really beautiful, lurid stuff in the mix as well.
Yeah, definitely. And there was a video game as well, wasn't there? I know there's like a run through of it on YouTube. I mean, I've never played.
You can actually go to abandonware.com, I think, and there's like you can play it in your browser.
Okay.
I've got a link somewhere. I can send it to you after. But yeah, I had a quick play of it. It's in that sort of text adventure, I guess, point and click adventure, LucasArts style.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. And of all the King titles to get like a random video game drop.
And it's so Thad, because Thad Beaumont ends up in all the scenarios where George Stark's killing people. It's sort of a really, just a very, very weird sort of concept, but it apparently almost got a sequel too.
Oh, wow. Well, there we go. I guess lastly then on the Dark Half, I mean, for anyone who is watching or listening this who hasn't gone in on the Dark Half yet, particularly on the book, what 3 words would you describe to sell the Dark Half and convince someone to give it a go?
I'm going to hyphenate so I can get it over the line. Straight razors and psychopomps.
Nice. Okay. Yeah.
Some high-tone sons of bitches ideas in there, but yeah, the limitations. Yeah.
Okay, no, I like it.
To work with it, yeah. I just got there just before we started to talk.
Great. Well, okay. Well, this has been fascinating to chat all things you and all things King, Garth. But before we're done, we're moving on to the quickfire 19-question King challenge. Like, we're doing this; it's not an optional thing, but I just want to check before we jump in. I guess, are you ready to give this a go?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, cool. So it's quickfire round. I might ask for more explanation if you say something particularly.
I think you might.
But otherwise, just assume you just answer the question with as little information as you want to, really. So, what was the first King book you read?
Eyes of the Dragon.
And what was the most recent King book you read?
Song of Susanna.
Okay. What's your all-time favourite King book?
Pet Cemetery.
And what about your all-time least favourite?
Dark Tower 7.
Okay. Is that are you just not a Dark Tower head, or was it that volume in particular that didn't work for you?
I felt I was sliding off the cliff, and yeah, I plummeted on beginning 7. Yeah,
fair enough.
Yeah, I hit the wall. Yeah.
What do you think is King's most underrated book?
Desperation.
Okay. In terms of like cover artwork, I'm intrigued to hear your answers for these couple with your graphic design background. What's your favorite King cover art?
The UK edition of It, by Jerry Grace, which is the orange shot of the house on Nibolt Street morphing into Pennywise. That was the one I read at the time, and that's there's a few. I mean, the old-timers, like some of the stuff around, obviously, the painted, more garish stuff from the 80s right up there. But that one in particular, like, as soon as I saw it again, I was like, oh, my God.
Yeah.
How did I even, like, it hadn't crossed my mind for years. And I was like, that is stunning, and I might buy the print.
Nice.
Yeah.
On the flip side, what about your least favourite cover art?
Any of the Photoshop stock image ones from the last, I guess it was early 2010s, maybe, where it's just a stock image with the filter over. Yeah, just no imagination, extremely dull. Sure, they get another edition out of it, but yeah, just crap. Yeah,
they must really pain someone like you who's got that design background. They must really pain you to look at, just at the wasted potential. Well, you know what's been done previously.
Yeah, I mean, like. To the Dark Tower books, like some of the Michael Whelan gear, really spectacular. And then obviously when the film came out 5 or 6 years ago, they went in the generic photoshopped man with no name direction. And just come on, get back to painting stuff.
Yeah,
back to give some illustrators, and some graphic artists some cred, because AI is going to eat it otherwise.
Yeah. What's the one King book you could recommend to any type of reader?
Oh, what am I going to say there? Any type of reader.
Yeah. Well, anyone who likes reading fiction, I guess.
I might dip in with like a Billy Summers.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
From a more recent sort of less, the crime stuff in general. Like, I don't love the Mr. Mercedes, but like, I think Billy Summers was a pretty solid entry in that sort of genre.
Okay. Yeah. Thinking about adaptations, so movies, miniseries, etc. What's your favorite King adaptation?
I love John Carpenter, so I'm going to go with Christine. Although it's probably like Dead Zone, Carrie, Shining.
There's been a few good ones.
Like all that stuff from the late 70s through to the late 80s was pretty great. We're pretty great, yeah.
What about your least favourite?
Cell.
Yep, fair, very fair. If you had the chance to have a King character make a cameo in your own work, who would you like to have?
I was going to go with Roland LeVay.
Oh yeah.
But I'm going to actually upgrade to Greg Stilson from the Dead Zone.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's so much fun. And I think he fits into the universe of like awful conservative politicians that I develop as the series of homebrewed books go on. Yeah.
Do any of your politicians like have a history of kicking dogs to death, or would that be something unique Stilson could offer?
One of them was like I guess Greg's probably a sort of lower stakes, like it's just nuclear war, not interdimensional cosmic resource harvesting. But it'd be fun to meet on the way.
Yeah, definitely. Which King book or story would you say is most similar to your own style of writing?
Regulators.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
And then for this one, I just want you to give me one King book for each of these. So one King book that you keep forever, so you reread it as many times as you like until it falls apart and you just love forever. One that you read only once and then just pop back on your shelf and never really think about again. And one that you would happily delete from existence.
The Stand is the all-timer. I'm going to go Needful Things in terms of like I'll read it once, contradicting myself a bit, but I think it's in that zone. And I hate Cell in every iteration, and I still don't understand. I mean, I guess it speaks to some of this classic boomer dad sort of technological weirdness over the years, but like every time it's something about, in the recent collection, what's the story about the mobile phone that rings from the grave, and always hilarious, but also a bit hard to stomach. And Cell's definitely the nadir of that sort of boomer dad gear. Yeah,
sure. Okay, and we're moving into the final 5 of this challenge now. These are just a straight either or.
Yep.
The book or the movie?
Book.
The Stand or It?
I'm going to go It because it's trashier. The Stand's still the better book, but It is a bit of it's a very entertaining read for all its flaws.
Mm-hmm. Would you rather take a holiday in Derry or have a night at the Overlook?
I'm going to drink with Lloyd.
Okay, nice. Short story or full novel?
Novel.
And lastly, would you rather go for walkies with Cujo or have a weekend away with Annie Wilkes?
I haven't come down on either. I'll take my chance with Annie just to be contrary to a few of the other answers I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, that's brave, but good. Okay, great. Well, Garth, this has been a lot of fun and really, really good to chat to you, and thank you for giving up your time to come on the podcast. Before we wrap up, I just wanted to sort of put it over to you to let people know where they can find you, more about you, and what you've got coming up. I mean, obviously, we're recording this just ahead of Volume 3 of Homebrewed coming out, so that will be out by the time this is out there. So, yeah, just the floor is yours. What have you got going on? Where can people find you?
I'm at passtheamyl.com, which is where I'm selling everything with the whole, you can get everything digitally or print on demand, which I found is an easier model, although I will do signed limited editions as when we get rolling a bit more. I'm on Twitter. We'll see how long that lasts now that it's X Corp or whatever it is, and the Doge images on there and all the other shit. At Pass the Amyl, Instagram at Pass the Amyl, and on Substack, and probably transitioning more into that space, although we said the same thing about Mastodon 6 months ago and we're still on Twitter. Coming up though, once I finish this 3 books, I'm going to move on to a project, a collaboration about the Brisbane music scene in the 70s, right. With another writer over here, and sort of reset my palette a bit and try and do something in another voice.
Right.
And that hopefully will take up the rest of the year at this point, try and get a manuscript done and then out in front of people. So that's a little bit of an exciting one to get on to, and just, researching and just getting a lot of reading done about because Brisbane was essentially like a police state in the 1970s and 80s under a sort of autocratic sort of Trump precursor. Lots to learn there because we only lived here for a few years. So all brand new.
Oh, sounds great. And I'll make sure there's links to everything you mentioned in the description so people can check you out. Brilliant. Again, Garth, thank you so much. It's been a great chat, and look forward to seeing what you do next.
Cheers, Dave. Thank you.
So there we go. Wasn't that great? Thanks so much to Garth for his time, for coming on the podcast and just delivering an absolutely smashing interview. Do check out Garth's work. I'll put all the links to everything he mentioned in the description below so you can go and find and support him. And hey, let me know what you think, and let me know what you think of The Dark Half as well. And if you want to find my 19 reasons to read The Dark Half, that's on my YouTube channel. I will make sure there's a link in all the relevant places too. So as ever, thank you for checking out Constant Writers. If you enjoyed this, then why not share it with a friend who might also feel the same? And make sure you're either following or subscribing, depending on where you're getting this show. It really does help this thing grow and spread a bit more. And if you want to check out my other stuff on YouTube, it's Dave Reads King on YouTube. You'll find me, and there's lots of videos there for you to check out. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Constant Writers. Next time, it's a big one. We're covering one featuring a certain clown, and it's the first of 2 episodes of this series where we're covering that particular book. So do come back for that. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can check out my Stephen King quiz book, you can sign up to the newsletter, all of those kind of things. But hey, if you're still listening at this point, you're probably just like, Dave, wrap it up, so I'm going to do that. Thank you for listening, and I'll be back with another Constant Writer very soon.